Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, if it's evening for you. Thank you very much. A very, very warm welcome. Thank you for joining us today at the Community of Practice of Climate Action in Education. This is our seventh gathering. It's really exciting to be here. We took a break for a month and a half, and many of you would be new faces to this as well, because this is the first time we've opened our Community of Practice for this particular gathering and the next gathering to everyone in the ecosystem, because usually our communities of practice are for members only, and this is an additional benefit for the members around it, for the spaces where we built for connections and peer pathways. But we wanted to open this conversation up as well, because this research in itself is very profound, and we feel it could be benefiting to the ecosystem and the practitioner voice coming up with it as well. But I'll be happy to share a bit about the community of practice as well, and direct you to the resources which you can refer to it later on. We will be sending out a key takeaway email at the end also, not today, tomorrow, but in this week or so. And you will have the opportunity to know more about the community of practice, benefit from the presentation shared today, and the voices heard today. But our community of practice is also a space which is not a monologue where one person speaks. It's always an opportunity of a dialogue. So we've tried to curate that one as well. So you'll get a kind of a sample of what we do in our community of practice as well. But that really depends on how open you are and how offering can you be in your space. So you're more than welcome to be as open as possible. So thank you very much. A bit about the Global Schools Forum. You may be familiar about the Global Schools Forum. We are an organization of 225 members now across 73 countries and growing. It's an incredible place of a community with very, very diverse, and we've really been together for over 10, almost 10 years now. This year would be our 10th year coming up. And we believe on basis of the community at the forefront, accelerating knowledge and creating spaces where knowledge can be shared widely. But most importantly, those connections can be built with each other, and those partnerships can be built, and funding pathways can be open, so that the beautiful work you do in your own context gets multiplied, and the children can see that benefit in every context, especially the underserved context. So thank you for contributing to this space as well. Today, we will initially revisit the context, what this community of practice has been about. We'll then offer the invitation to Charlie to share about the research report, then Sujina for shedding into a practitioner perspective or United World Schools practice. And we also invite you into a collective dialogue, a space where you can share what resonated with you and how do you feel this acts out in your context. So we'll go into a breakout room as well, and we would recommend if you can stay till the very end. We also have a poll at the end, which we would highly encourage you to fill in. It takes a minute or so, but this really gives us the feedback of when to open to the wider ecosystem, how to open it up, and how can we carry these conversations more in an enriching way. And we also have another gathering, which is also open for the wider ecosystem. That's on August 20th, and we'll speak very shortly about that at the end, and we can send that in the takeaway email as well. But before we proceed, we just want to share thank you. We are very grateful for your presence. We know that it's always a challenging time to pay attention at one thing today, because many things call for our attention. Right now, you might have multiple devices and multiple people waiting for you, but the best you can do is be where you are. And if you are here, which you are, please be fully, and that will always create the magic. And we've seen that. So we highly recommend you to be fully here. Thank you so much for that. We kicked off our community of practice early in 2026. Generally, these communities of practices are a response to our community need, and climate is a constant need which has come up again and again. I was in the earlier minute or so asking Sujina how's the weather, and she said it's flooding right now in Kathmandu. And unfortunately, it has been flooding in many places in Pakistan right now and elsewhere. Uh, and that has becoming a norm, while June, July, and this period used to be a period of vacations, but of travel into the same areas which are flooded today. So things are changing. The impact has really been very wide, and we'll hear much more about it today. But that's something where we felt that a community of practice needs to be begin, but not only about the surviving framework, which is how do we respond to it, which we will largely speak about today, but also how can we thrive from it? How can we create spaces within our schools and curriculums and our communities which respond even at the source level? How can we build those curriculums as well and those practices which can be more enriching from the very beginning and start on and have a legacy much more rather than just responding immediately? We've had 6 sessions so far, 5 led by fantastic organizations across our community, including Earth Warriors, Link Education. You can read. We'll send a bit more in the takeaway email about them as well. And we've learned fascinating elements about what, while we are struggling individually, what can we learn to do together? And this session will be a bit of a shift around understanding the financial cost around it and what needs to be really built at resilience. But before that, I would like to share a bit around the learnings and request you to maybe drop in the chat what resonates with you for your own context. So a few things which we've really learned is climate change cannot be addressed in isolation. It's not a border problem. It's not a sovereignty challenge. It goes cross borders. It shows us that these borders can be sometimes temporary. And climate has always been there and continues to be there. So, and it is also not addressed in isolation of education or infrastructure or health. It has to be interministerial, it has to be intergovernmental. So it has to be a lot of that intergenerational and partnership oriented. Agency matters much more than awareness. A lot of time and energy has gone into awareness and much more is needed. But what we've learned from our schools and school networks who participated within this community of practice so far is that we have to go beyond that awareness and we have to create that clubs or those spaces where agency is visible and where agency is also practiced by students, by communities, by parents. The local knowledge is an untapped resource. This is something maybe we've forgotten for other fronts of education and the philosophy of life or other aspects around it. But for a climate, it's a humble reminder because indigenous practices have always embraced climate. They've always embraced their surroundings. They've always embraced in their ritualistic practices. They've always embraced what does it mean to have a beautiful relationship with nature within them. And in the material kind of life we've started to live in this age, that distance has just grown. So it's an invitation to tap back into that local knowledge as well, which is available to us, but maybe invisible to us. And how can we make it visible again? There is will, but there is a structural constraint as well. There are many structural constraints around it, and you may be more familiar than us around it as well. And there are very competing priorities as well. And that's why it is unfortunate that even to date, when climate conversations happen, education is at the backdrop. It does not really come forward. And how can we bring that? And Charlie will speak a lot about that, given that the research was focused on bringing education at the center stage as well. Spillover impact is real, but it is really under measured. So what we are measuring is not fully substantial up till now. How can we measure better? How can we calculate better? How can we have a collective voice that echoes beyond these spaces, which are really important, but how can these spaces be strengthened further? So as I introduce our guest for today, if anything from these learnings have echoed with you just at the immediate essence, please drop your name, drop your organization, and drop what that feeling has been and what that learning has been. And let that chat continue so that you can hear from each other while we start hearing from the guests as well. So thank you once again for joining us today. Very, very happy. And my name is Ajay. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm a member of the GSF, and I've been leading with Kiara, my colleague who's here, the community of practice of climate action and education. Today's guests, we are very, very honored to have Charlie and Sujina. Charlie is a partner at Dalberg and co-leads education to employment practice. He's based in Nairobi. Charlie has also been a teacher for economics as well, and with his background and he wears many, many hats. So maybe, Charlie, you can share a bit about the different hats you wear as well. And yes, we also have Sujina. Sujina also wears several hats. She's leading within the United World Schools, who operates within Nepal, Cambodia, Myanmar, and Madagascar. And she works with all those country operations. especially on building climate resilient schools and the infrastructure. She'll be speaking about all four contexts, but deeping dive into two contexts, Nepal and Cambodia. So welcome both of you. Thank you for taking the time and your energy and your presence here. I'll hand it over to you, Charlie, to take this forward.
Thank you so much. And as you say, um, Ajay, a lot of competing priorities for everyone. So I really appreciate people taking the time today to kind of discuss this topic. So as you shared, yeah, my name is Charlie Habershon. I'm a partner at Dalberg and lead our global education practice. Formerly a teacher and have been working in the education space ever since. Our Dalberg is an impact-focused strategy consulting firm, and our work in education has really been focused in three different areas. One is around kind of financing. How do we unlock new financing into education, and how do we ensure that that financing is spent in the right way? Around education and technology, a lot of work around how do we bring together the ecosystem and identify where there are opportunities to use technology in education, but ensuring that that is always done in a safe and affordable way and is actually driving greater learning outcomes. And then in climate as well. And in climate, we look at two different angles. One is around where are the opportunities, especially on the African continent, in climate action, and so doing work in like how do we prepare young people to work in climate jobs, for example, but then also looking at the side of resilience and acknowledging the impact that climate change is having on our education system, and how do we address that? And that really is where that sort of last point will be really where I'll be discussing today, which is some research that we conducted with UNICEF. So I'm just going to pull up my presentation. Hopefully everyone, I've sort of skipped to the end there, but I'll bring it back to the beginning. So yeah, as I shared, we were working closely. We partnered with UNICEF just to look at what has been the quantifiable impact of climate change on education infrastructure in East and Southern Africa. As AJ shared in the introduction, like we are all experiencing climate change, and as practitioners in education, those of you working, across the globe, across the continent, you are seeing firsthand the impact that climate change is having. And yet we know that less than 1% of climate financing is going into education. And as a sector, we have not always been as strong as we could have been in really advocating for how do we get more climate finance into education. And that's where UNICEF and Dalberg came together to really think about how do we help to strengthen the case for climate financing into education? How do we start to quantify it, building that evidence base so we can say in real dollars what climate change what climate change is costing education systems, making that funding case, so pushing for education to be treated as climate action, both in international climate finance and in countries' own budgets across the region. How do we get education in the room so that when, often, on this call, for example, we are all kind of bought into that idea, but there are many that don't understand or see the impact. So how do we ensure education shows up in those big climate finance conversations? When we're talking about the new loss and damage fund, how do we ensure that education is right at the top? And then how do we link education to expert groups? So when we see technical support and risk assessments being built, how do we ensure that education is being built into that? So some big objectives that we had in terms of developing this research, and some big kind of numbers that we wanted to get to that would really help us with the advocacy tool. So when we really looked at that economic loss and damage, we looked mainly at the immediate impact. And because the focus today is really on infrastructure, that's where we're going to be looking at. We also, as the researchers, felt most confident around estimating that immediate impact because it's very tangible in terms of what has that impact happened on physical infrastructure. However, we know that often we look at what that long-term impact is as well, in particular around future learning and earnings. And that gives us often a kind of bigger headline number, but a harder number to really stand by because as you'd imagine, a lot of assumptions are built into that. So today, what I would share was really the impact, that immediate impact. And where we got to was that where we estimated was that immediate economic loss and damage to education for documented events was estimated to be around $0.2 billion. And then that 1.1 billion of immediate was around those undocumented events, so we know that after a disaster, often, it's documented what the damage had been, but based on assumptions, we could see that those that aren't undocumented, that total was coming to $1.3 billion from 2005 to 2024. There is a lot that sits behind this. I wanted to kind of get a bit more practical with case studies rather than going too much into the methodology. But if there are questions about that, happy to kind of dive in, and then I will tactically divert you to the team that was closer to the detail on those spreadsheets. But that a lot of work done in terms of coming up with that number. And as you can see, that if the status quo is kept, that total economic loss and damage could increase up to 260 to 320 million per year by 2025, bringing that kind of net present value up to $3.8 billion. So a huge amount and a really helpful, hopefully, number that we can use as an advocacy tool when making the case for that really large impact that climate change is having on education in East and Southern Africa. And so those were the headlines to come out of our initial research. But what we then did was we had a deep dive then on some specific areas, and one of them, which I thought was really relevant for this group, was to think about then what if schools were resilient? How do we make the case for building resilient schools? And I know we're going to hear a little bit more about that later from Sujina. Looking forward to hearing more of those examples. But we know that in an increasingly sort of tight fiscal space, it's hard to justify increased spending. When a Ministry of Education is going to Treasury to make the case for these schools are going to be slightly more expensive, but they will be resilient, that can be a hard case to make. So how do we build that evidence base to make those conversations easier and really make that case? And so as Mozambique is a good example, and as many of you will be aware, that is one of the most climate vulnerable countries facing frequent intensifying cyclones. And so what we've seen from 2005 to 24, 54 extreme weather events and 1.9 thousand deaths, with a specific spike you can see in 2019 with the cyclones of Kenneth and Idai, which made headlines around the world. Now, these cyclones affected millions of people and had a huge impact on children in particular, with many people displaced and deaths as well, with significant loss and damage. We saw in our research that 4.7 thousand classrooms affected, 420,000 students impacted, over 10,000 teachers affected, and 24.1 million in loss and damage in education across just those two cyclones. But from that, there is a really kind of compelling story that came about, and that admits that widespread devastation. We saw these schools that had been built with resilient school guidelines actually remaining in good condition. Resilient schools, and this, when I saw this, when I first came across this case study, it was really striking to see that 100% survival rate during those two cyclones. No resilient school building collapsed or became unsafe. Um, but while those are just the schools that were able to do, we know that only 5% of those schools are climate resilient. And so while an estimated 3,500 schools were built or rebuilt following these climate resilient standards, over that was over a total stock of over 63,000 schools. So a huge gap that still remains. Not only did those schools survive and allow for teaching to continue, these resilient schools served as reliable emergency shelters during crisis, and they enabled a faster return to safe learning. Now, schools being used as emergency shelters in communities, I know, is a whole nother debate as well, because often these are used and that can impact schools, children going back. But still, we can see how important these buildings were for the community. So if you're going to Treasury to make the case, Treasury will often want to see a return on investment. So that's what we look to really calculate as well. So calculating that the damage that climate change, that these disasters have on schools, around $15,000. That's with the reconstruction, the emergency response, loss of assets. And we use two estimations here, that like at 20% of the original cost and 10%, because there are varying sources that are out there, one at 6,500, one at 3,250. And what we saw is that if you survive one disaster, then you can get 2.4 to 4.8 return on your investment. And that can go, or if it's up to 3 times, you can get up to 13 times. So for every dollar spent, up to over $13 return on your investment. And what we found, and what we found as well is that resilience is cheapest when embedded from the start. And so if we can make the case for when there are new schools being built to build with that resilience, then it can have a huge return on investment. And so with nearly kind of every classroom in Mozambique exposed to hazards worsened by climate change, investing in resilient school construction is absolutely essential. We saw that 95% of classrooms are exposed to at least one major hazard. And that's each year 540 classrooms, 57,000 students facing school disruptions. And so the impact and the case is pretty clear in Mozambique specifically. I thought this was interesting because I know there are many practitioners on the call as well. What do we mean then when we talk about sort of climate resilient classrooms? And there are some examples here. So, for example, cyclone resistant roofing, elevated foundations for flood zones, heat and ventilation solutions, and often kind of localized construction as well as kind of some maintenance considerations. So some kind of practical ideas there around what that actually means. And often these can be done at a relatively kind of low cost. But we know that while this is the case, that we see a huge funding gap. So estimated at 3 billion required to deliver roughly 80,000 additional classrooms built with this resilience. And I will stop soon because I know I've been talking for a long time, but we know that these resilient school investments also deliver non-economic benefits. So keeping children safe, emotionally secure, and in school, with particular benefits for girls as well. Resilient schools can protect learning and well-being, and they can prevent girls in particular from dropping out of school, which we know once a girl drops out of school, very difficult to get them back in as well. So if we can reduce that, the gender impact that we see is huge. So in this, we're really kind of making recommendations on what then going forward, in particular from a government perspective. Firstly, prioritizing those highest risk zones to maximize the cost benefit. We know that you can't do the whole portfolio, so how do you then really look to identify and prioritize the highest risk zones? And then secondly, how do you align infrastructure And then how do you align infrastructure with those zone-specific risks? Um, as I said, investing in resilience from the start. Are there ways that you can kind of mobilize innovative finance? And then really putting equity at the center, so ensuring that every infrastructure includes gender and child responsive design. Okay, great. Hopefully that gives you a kind of a good sort of snapshot of the work. And yeah, I look forward to sort of discussing that in more detail later on.
Thank you so much, Ali. Um, First, thank you for even leading the research. I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of many practitioners here because practitioners by themselves may not have the capacity to reach the research, but they're very busy even figuring out what to do in the immediacy of an event. I have a couple of questions, but I'll pause there. I'm sure many others have. So this is your space. If you want to raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask, please do so. Or if you're comfortable putting on the chat, more than welcome. I can kick us off. I can start with a question, Charlie, around has this research got you into any conversation, any government room so far? Has this brought you closer to any government space? And what has that conversation looked like before the research and after the research, if there has been any?
So, so I think we launched this. I think launched this in around April. And what we tried to do is the first this first kind of area, and obviously we are doing this with UNICEF, so they've been leading a lot of those kind of conversations. But the first one was really to sort of present this as part of kind of the loss and damage conversations that were happening um, in Zambia. So that was the first place, and what particularly we made sure to kind of include a Zambia specific case study in there because I think bringing that home to the host as well particularly resonated. And what we've actually seen now is from this. What's interesting is this was a regional piece of research, but we're now seeing interest at a country level. And so government saying, right, well, we can see that. What does that actually mean? And how can we get now more specific around the impact that is happening at a country and even at a county level so that we can be making that case as an education sector to Treasury example for budget. So I think this research at a high level, and the next step then we're seeing is like how do we then take it to a country level as well?
Sorry, I see a raise of hand. Innocent?
Thank you so much, Charlie, for that presentation. This is Innocent from Malawi, and very interesting because Malawi is a neighbor to Zambia, both Zambia and Mozambique that you have referenced to. So for Link, we are also implementing resilient schools in a climate just communities project. So what we're doing, we are actually working directly with the schools. Yeah, we are training head teachers. We are also training uh, DRM or disaster risk management club patrons and matrons, just to ensure that learners are at the center of the process. Why we're training the school leaders is that we are embedding everything within the school improvement plan. So from your research, I wanted to understand the role or what have you found about how schools are being empowered to actually do the needs assessment, to identify the risk areas, and embed their priorities within the school improvement plan so that they can, start off, responding, preparing, responding, and recovering without external help, knowing that, we are in resource constraint context like Malawi and Mozambique. So I wanted to hear that from your side.
Yeah, and it's great. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for the question, and also great I've heard, yeah, already a lot of work that Link is doing on climate resilient schools. So thank you so much for sharing that and joining today. I think, you know, as I shared, our work it's kind of like quite a top-down approach, I suppose, in terms of kind of how do we get this as a priority for governments and those kind of funders in the education space and in the climate space as well, so that it becomes a priority and then that hopefully then sort of trickles down alongside with financing as well. So our hope is that through this type of research, people see the importance of investing that in this space, and then that makes financing available, but also is shared as a priority amongst school leaders and county governments and others around why we should be investing in this space, and that in turn then should, working with partners such as yourself, then once that's been prioritized, how do you then actually provide that support to implement in? So it is, I kind of acknowledging that it is quite a top-down approach, but you obviously need those to be implementing it, but also for communities to see it as a priority. And sometimes that top-down approach can be a bit frustrating because this time and money is spent on creating these numbers, and the community say, well, we know that already, right? We know that it's happening, and we also have great solutions in how to do this as well. But if we can combine that community-driven approach with the top-down approach, hopefully we can then make this a priority for everyone.
Yeah. So while I was asking Charlie, thank you for that response. Very, very useful. Is that I don't know if there's an opportunity to add voices from the community as well within that research. If there's still an opportunity to add so that maybe on the impacts, but also on some of the things that are already working on the ground. But when we're in those discussions with the ministerial officials or donors, it should be also the voice of the community members, especially those that are vulnerable. Like you said, everybody has to be at the center. I don't know if there's that opportunity.
No, I think that would be a great addition to this research as well. And that's why we did try and, we brought some case studies in to sort of tell a bit of that story. But I think we could go even deeper than some of those relatively high level case studies. I think the challenge at doing something regional is that you sometimes lose some of that detail. And so I think, yeah, going forward, when, as I shared, there is some demand to do stuff at a country level, it'd be great to see about how you might bring through some of those community voices as well.
Thank you so much, Innocent, and thank you for raising that as well. I think that's genuinely needed as well. We have two questions, one from Samuel, and then I'll just put it out from Nazia. How did you identify the schools for your research? And we can hear Samuel, and maybe you want to combine them or take them together. Samuel? Samuel, we cannot hear you yet if you're speaking. Maybe, Samuel, do you want to drop your question in the chat? And in the meanwhile, Charlie, maybe you can respond to Naz.
So again, and I know more and more like how high level this research was, but I suppose we were not identifying specific schools as such. It was, as I shared, some of it was based on documented where we could see that the damage had been documented. So after, and often we were using publicly available published information. So where we'd identified where there had been a climate disaster, we then looked for where there was documentation on the damage that had happened. So where there was documentation, we used those schools and that data to feed into our estimations. And where there wasn't documented information, that's where we had to build in some assumptions. So we identified it, I suppose, through following the data of where that documentation had happened.
Thank you. Zemia? I don't know if I've pronounced your name correctly. Please correct me there.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. For me, it was just a simple question to Charlie from his research because we are working with the rural community schools in Tanzania. but one of the biggest challenges we are facing is the way how we can handle it best, like the way we do the sustainability plan for the communities which we are supporting. So my question will go to Charlie as from his research. Uh, has he come across challenges regarding sustainability from the schools that need funding support after they've been supported?
And so, and just so I understand, sorry, my sound, I don't think is great. So, in terms of how do we find solutions to kind of provide that financial support to schools to bring this in to support them, or you said around sustainable financing, or
Yes, like sustainability in the way, like for us as an organization, we are getting funding uh, from out of the country. So
yeah,
we work closely with the government and the local community
yeah,
to do the most prioritized projects for the community schools. So the biggest challenge that we are facing here, I know like your research was basically on Malawi and Mozambique, something, if I'm not mistaken. But we are also very close to those countries, but our experience might be different. For our case here in Tanzania, I just want to learn if from your research you've ever come across challenges regarding sustainability, like how the community will take the ownership
yeah,
to develop their own schools after they've been supported.
yeah. No, I think a few of the examples that we've heard already have sort of touched on that. And one is that, yeah, we know that there's a huge financing gap to actually develop these climate resilient schools. And that's what part of this research was trying to do, to sort of make the case for climate financing to be coming in. And so unlocking that additional finance. But then to earlier points, I think really important to ensure that this is community led as well. And we are thinking of indigenous designs and thinking about how to build these schools in a way, but then also, yeah, what's the ownership from local communities to really to see the importance of building schools and protect and maintaining schools in this type of way that helps to keep children in school, but then also provides a kind of a safe place for the community as well in during climate disasters.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time as well, but again, I know that many questions may go beyond the research as well, but I think that also demonstrates that there is much more need for a wider conversation beyond the research as well. So thank you, Charlie, for entertaining and engaging with these questions firsthand. There are a couple of questions which have come up, 3 questions in the chat, and I know Noman as well. Let's try to maybe club them together so that we can have some fair bit. We can take a minute or so. I know there's a question around local communities and parents feeling meaningfully engaged around return on investment numbers. Are they from the perspective of the government or the private sector? And then there's another questions also have come around. So maybe just think about how do you want to frame some of that, and we can take that into the breakout later on as well.
Sure, and I'm just having a look at those as well. So I think return on investment is in terms of the government. So for every dollar they invest in climate resilient schools, then they can look to save X amount in terms of future loss and damage. So very much seeing it as a government investment. In terms of kind of, I saw something around how can low resource schools implement like there are, from Samuel, that's a really great question. And I think the colleagues from Link would be able to provide some thoughts on this as well, I think, in terms of how do we think about low cost and often kind of, it doesn't have to be low cost and indigenous, but often we are seeing interesting and innovative indigenous designs as well that can be owned by local community and can be to really help to build that resilience. And then I saw a question as well, a great question on like the decision making. How do you actually identify where there's high risk? areas are. And I think that there is a lot of publicly available data at a kind of, you could, at a national level, you could be looking at where have we seen the highest cases of recorded climate challenges, where is that climate risk, and therefore can we prioritize where we think the highest risk areas are in order to to prioritize where to invest that infrastructure with the knowledge that you can't be doing it across. I'm just flicking through. I don't know if I've covered.
I think,
Um,
but yeah, that
uh,
makes. I know that Noman has a bigger question around, how can governments even prioritize investment? What kind
yeah.
of, what kind of decision-making framework can they use, and how can organizations like Noman, who works with the government, to mobilize teachers and other aspects, how can we even enable them to think better around the costing part of it?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's where those country level kind of plans come in, using the data around where is the biggest impact happening, identifying sort of practical solutions that can help to build resilience for specific climate hazards that we know are common in those areas as well, and then thinking about, I think where there's opportunities is where schools are starting to think about new infrastructure that's coming in, and then how do you make the case to ensure that when that new infrastructure is being built, that climate resilience is being thought of? Because as we saw, the biggest return on investment, or the most sort of sustainable and effective way to do it, is to build in that design from day one. So how are we thinking about those new stocks of schools that are being rolled out, while also sort of doing some retrofitting in kind of high risk areas?
Thank you, Charlie. This has been really phenomenal. And especially because the questions have come in, that means there's a lot of interest and eagerness to understand it much deeper. And also an offering as well that, that practitioners can learn a lot from each other. And we've seen that in the community of practice. And Link Education could be a great example as well. Since maybe you want to drop your email address, or we can share later on as well, and you can connect with each other as well. I'll hand it over to Kiara before moving to Sujina, because there's one thing we're working on within this community of practice that might be helpful in engaging with this dialogue further. So, Kiara, over to you.
Thank you, Ajay. Thank you, Charlie, for that presentation. And thank you, everyone, for your questions. I think what this says to me is that research is such an important area to move this work forward, that there are so many unanswered questions still, and no one piece of research is going to be able to answer them all. So it's really amazing to have Charlie and Dalberg sort of really look into the infrastructure, costs of the infrastructure damage and the return on investment in investing in more resilient schools. But there are so many other questions that we need to be looking at to help schools better prepare for these events and better prepare children for the future that is here to stay. And one thing to just plug, or something to let you know about, is GSF is partnering with Harvard. Over the next few months, we will be running a shared piece of research ourselves that is going to dive into some of these other areas that the questions have come up about. What are some of the key practices that are happening to identify what are the promising practices in these different impacted regions? What is currently happening in education around climate action? What kind of education is happening? What are the biggest barriers to implementing more resilient schools and kind of curriculums around building agency around climate action? So this is just a early, I guess, invitation that there will be opportunities to contribute to this kind of research, which we hope will start, or at least add a piece of the puzzle to answering some of these questions that are coming up in the call today in more depth. So basically just, keep being involved. There will be more opportunities to both add to the dialogue and then also listen to what other people will be able to share through these kinds of survey mechanisms.
Thank you, Kiara. And thank you once again, Charlie, for offering your time, space, and leading this research and giving us the opportunity to engage with it. Thank you so much. Some of your questions may be very well responded through the next session as well. So I think handing it over to Sujina, we'll dive into 4 different country contexts. Very challenging, very differently challenging as well. But handing it over to Sujina to hear more. Thank you, Sujina. Sujina, you're on mute.
I hope I'm audible. So, thank you, Ajay. I'm really excited for what Kiara just shared, and really like to thank Global School Forum for bringing us together. And the presentation that we just saw from Charlie, I think those numbers, those case studies, was very, very insightful, and all the questions that have been here. I'm also really very excited what everyone is putting through. So I'm really hopeful and looking forward. So hi again, everyone. My name is Sujina Aasaki. I'm from Global Programs of a Global Program Officer with United World Schools. I'm based in Nepal, and I work across multiple countries supporting program quality, learning, and school infrastructure initiatives in some of the world's most remote and climate vulnerable communities. We have just heard from Charlie and the Dalberg research about the scale of climate-related risks facing education systems. And what I would like to talk today is bring that research to life by sharing what climate-smart infrastructure could actually look like in practice, from now how we choose where to build to what resilient construction means on ground and how communities help sustain what builds over the time. So let me start with a very short, brief story from Nepal that captures why all of this matters. Last year, the community of Kanpur, located in Sangkhwa Sabha in Nepal, experienced a very severe landslide and flash flood. Thankfully, no one was injured, but the school building was badly affected, and the ground beneath one of the building is shifted. The foundation was sank, and a few of the classroom became very unsafe for children to use. The easiest response could have been rebuild the classroom, but for us, the more important question was why did the school become vulnerable in the first place? So together with the community and local government, UWS reassessed the site, looked again at the risks, rebuilt it in a safer locations, and students were able to return to the learning in safer classroom at the start of the new year or the new school academic year. So for me, the Kanpur story shows what climate smart infrastructure really means. It is not just replacing what was damaged. It is sometimes also understanding the risks and rebuilding it differently, because every climatic shock has the potential to become an education shock. And Kanpur reminds me that resilience is not measured by how quickly we rebuilt it, but it also measured by whether the next climatic shock caused the same damage again. And this is why for UWS school infrastructure has become very central and central to how we protect the learning too. So just to briefly introduce UWS work with remote and marginalized communities where children are often most exposed to climate risks and least able to recover from disruptions to education. So over the years, we have been supporting schools across 4 countries. We have learned that resilience isn't simply a construction issue; it's a system issue. And resilient building helps, but a resilient school requires communities, local governments, school leaders, financing mechanisms that can maintain and adapt infrastructures as a condition change. So this becomes important later when we also talk about sustainability. But over the past decade, UWS has built and supported hundreds of schools across Nepal, Cambodia, Myanmar, and Madagascar. And through that work, we have learned a great deal about what helps school remain safe, accessible, functional, and when climatic shocks occurs. So today, we have built more than 335 schools, transitioned more than 178 schools to local ownership, support learning over 91,000 children across 4 countries. So over the time, our work has evolved simply from just building the schools to also strengthening the local system and community ownership. And that matters for the climate resilience, because a school is not resilient only because how it is built. It is also resilient when the community, school leadership, and local government are able to maintain and protect it over the time. And across the countries where we work, the risks looks very different, but the impact on the learning is often the same. So I think one of the messages in Dalberg research is also that the climate impact looks different in different settings. So climate risk does not look same everywhere. So in Nepal, we can see it's often with the landslide, earthquakes, heavy monsoon, and difficult terrain. In Cambodia, it's seasonal flooding, drought, and water access are the major concern. In Myanmar, flooding and extreme weather affects already unserved communities. And in Madagascar, cyclone, droughts, and flooding place schools and families under a real pressure. And in Madagascar, cyclones have played a very big disastrous role, where we are still trying to figure out what's our role would be. But although these hazards look very different in all the four contexts, the outcome is very often similar, where children are missing school, teachers are struggling to reach the classrooms, buildings are being damaged, water sanitation systems do not work properly, families are being displaced, and eventually the learning is interrupted. So our starting point simply cannot be where do we build a classroom, but then the starting point has to be what risks could stop children from learning here. So while the hazards are different, the design question remains remarkably very consistent, that what could stop children learning here, and how do we reduce that particular risk? So that is why climate resilience has to begin before construction starts. If there's one thing that I want everyone to take away from my bit of time, is that climate resilience begins before constructions, and it just does not begin with design drawing. It begins with asking better question of like what, where, and like and even in the research shows us that like resilient schools generate significant benefit and avoid future losses. But those benefits start with decision made before the design is finalized. So before construction, our team looks at a landslide risk, flood exposure, slope stability, water availability, the access during the monsoon, and the road conditions, whether the community can realistically maintain that infrastructure over the time or not. So I would not see this as like it looks like very 6-step process, but it's actually like a simple 3-step thing. We access it, we prepare, and then we build it. So just to give you an example, a very recent flood damage that happened in Gulmi in Nepal is after an extreme monsoon, a landslide triggered about like 100 meters of landslide below the school level. So like the land became very unstable, and classroom have a very serious cracks, and many of the classroom have to be dismantled so that to prevent the collapse. But when we do the full repairs, we do not rush for the repairs, but instead we move towards a technical assessment first. We did the slope stabilization, we did the gabion walls, we did some of the bioengineering options before deciding what's the long-term solution is. So this school particularly reminds me that sometimes the most climate smart decision is not to build immediately. Sometimes it's also about pausing and accessing it properly and put the safety pause. It also requires to take a very meaningful pause, long enough to understand the risks properly, and then often the difference between rebuilding infrastructure and also reducing the vulnerability on the other end. So once the risks is understood, the next question also becomes, what does a climate smart schools actually looks like? So for UWS, climate smart school usually means 4 things: safe site, resilient construction, reliable wash, and inclusive access. So this means earthquake resistance construction. It might also means good drainage. It also means retaining wall, accessible toilets, child friendly hand washing stations, natural light and ventilation, safe playgrounds, and classroom that remain usable during extreme weathers. So this it is very important that the resilience is not always dramatic or like it's very big things. Sometimes it's a very small detail that prevents a bigger disruptions later. A tap that works, a drainage system that would not block, or a roof that will not leak during the monsoon, or a safe access route during the monsoon. So these are not just a small thing when we determine that whether the children can come to school and stay in school and learn and continue their learning. On the other hand, what this looks like in also practice depends upon a totally local context. So I'm just going to give you some examples what it looks like in Nepal and Cambodia majorly. So the examples that I'm giving is also not very general to Nepal and Cambodia, but also very contextual to the particular community and the particular place where these schools stands on. So Nepal climate smart infrastructures often start with land itself. As you know, Nepal have a very difficult terrain in terms of hilly areas. So schools are built to the national seismic standards, but also because it's in hilly areas, we work in those areas. The building is not only one part of the solution. We have to make sure there are retaining walls, there are structures or drainage. There should be a site selection that are often important to protect foundation of the schools and keep the schools safe for future hazards. So there are many places in Nepal where heavy monsoon rainfall create landslide risks around school infrastructure, and retaining walls need to be constructed to protect those schools. On the other side, Cambodia presents a very different challenge again. In many communities, the main issue is seasonal flooding and water access. So the schools are often elevated over the ground level, allowing classroom to remain usable during the floods, and while the space underneath can be used for play or facilities during the dry seasons. And sometimes the resilience is also not only about the classroom building. In one of these schools that you can see the picture, in Cambodia, children and teachers went 7 years without a reliable water. So there were several wells drilled unsuccessfully before the community, and recently we have been able to establish a new water source, a pipeline, a pumping system. So that changed the school life. Children could wash their hands, toilets became usable, hygiene improved, and eventually the attendance also improved. What's striking is that neither of these examples begin with classroom design, but both started with understanding the primary risks to the learning. So despite Nepal and Cambodia show two very different solutions, but the same objective remain, keeping the children learning safety. So these examples also show that resilience does not always require bigger investment first. Sometimes it can be start at different levels, because resilience is not about all or nothing. Sometimes we hear there is a big investment needed, there is a expensive construction projects are very expensive, but resilience can also begin with small practical actions. At one level, it is about strengthening school preparedness, like the maintenance system, community hazard, tree plantation. Another level, it is about strengthening essential services and adapting to what's there, maybe the repairing the water storage, or like keeping it accessible to all, wash facilities. And then there are bigger infrastructure investment, and definitely these needs bigger investments with the school building, retaining walls, earthquake, and everything. So we are also seeing climate risks such as rising school temperature. And so in some of the schools, simple measures like the wall fan or how we do the ventilation system helps make the classroom more comfortable during the hotter months, and supporting children to continue their learning even at that time. So sometimes resilience doesn't always start with a very large sum of money. It's also start with like, what's the major risk there, and what is the useful next step that we can do to prevent it. But even again, the best design infrastructure will not remain resilient on its own. And that brings us to what happens after these construction, what happened after all this. This is where the conversation often becomes very important, where it is not the end of climate smart infrastructure. It is the beginning of a longer process. These buildings need maintenance. This water system need repairs. These walls need like monitoring. So as climate risks increase and evolve, school faces new risks that were not visible at the time of the construction. So some of the schools that we see are very safe, that are very protected. in the next few years, we see that it's suffering from landslide, flood. The climate has been very unpredictable. So we need to talk honestly about financing after construction also. So climate resilience is not just one-off tick marks. So in fact, one of the biggest risks we have seen isn't necessarily just the climate risks, but the maintenance risks also, because the drainage system that is not maintained will eventually fall. The water system without financing for repair eventually stops functioning. So resilience therefore has to be financed throughout the life of the assets and not only the point of the construction. So if you finance only the building but not the maintenance, then we are at the risk of losing the value of that investment. So that is why we again try to bring community ownership, school management committees, mothers group, local government to this to our UWS model, so that they can help us to ensure that these infrastructures are cared, monitored, and sustained. So if I bring this to a wider discussion today, the message is quite very simple, that that when the Dalberg also asks us to consider the rising cost of climate impacts and education, but what we see from the grounds, from the fields, is that every resilient infrastructure decision helps to reduce those future costs while protecting children's ability to learn. So choosing a safer land, the strengthening the drainage, elevating classrooms, and none of this decision alone solves the climate crisis, but together they determine whether children can continue to learning when climate shocks happen. So again, if you return to the Kanpur story, the success is not that the damaged classroom was built, but the success is that when the next landslide occur, children will be in a much safer place, and because the community choose to build it differently. So yeah, just bringing it back to the climate infrastructure is not just about building just a stronger school. It's also about ensuring that children can keep learning, and no matter what the challenge that they would be facing. So thank you again. I have tried to just show what climate smart infrastructures looks like in practice in our context so far, and I look forward hearing how others are approaching, and happy to take any reflections, any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sujina. I know there's lots to cover from 4 different contexts, 2 different contexts, and then pre and during and post. So thank you for fascinatingly just walking us through your context, the story, and also even connecting us with the children over there. I think that in itself is really fascinating. Yeah, I'm sure there are questions. We can do 2 ways. We can, if there's an urgent question right away, we can have one, or the opportunity is we would love to hear from you as well. So we can go into breakout rooms. We have one question for you. You will be in a group of 4 or 5. And the question is very simple. What resonated within your own context? And or something like Kiara asked, what are the quick wins which are working in your own context, which you can start with or you've already started with and would love to share with a group of colleagues. And then when we come back, we can, have the wider discussion and close it as well. But if somebody has an urgent question right away from Sujina, I don't want you to forget it. So you can right away ask that. There's a lot of George.
Hello. Hello.
Hi,
Hello,
George.
can you hear me?
Yes,
Can
we
you hear me,
can.
please? Yes, I think, Sujina, I think I like your presentation. Thanks so much. It resonated with me very, very well. And I think maybe a little context here. The construction, I like the statement when it says construction, I mean resilience, climate resilience starts before even constructing a school. And in our context, yeah, I mean, design are done by at national level. It's a kind of one size fits all, meaning if they have agreed on a particular structure, that's what goes up, does not care about the environment assessment and the like. So I wanted to ask you a question: to what extent is your work, much are you collaborating with government? Simply because, I mean, for us here, schools are government, although we had the private school, but we are working largely in schools of our government-assisted schools. So to what extent, I don't know, maybe I can put it, but collaborating with government to ensure that some of those few good things that we have not mentioned about what happens before constructing, during, and even after to be able to sustain that.
Yeah, thank you, George, for that questions. And I think that brings me to the use of this model that I shared at the end. The local government definitely plays a very important role. We eventually don't start right away and go there and start construction. I think they are the very primary people that we consult with, because they are the people who has been living there. They know the context well, so they are very primary to when we do everything. We start with them. We involve them in our committee of to site selection, to site inspection, to everything that we do. So we don't do anything in isolation. Local government are a bigger part of it, and in terms of financing also, we also try to bring if there are any budgets that can be allocated for those schools. Of course, we also try to negotiate in that terms also, and bringing them on board from the very beginning also help us to also transfer that ownership, and for the further maintenance that they do after we hand over the schools. And we also make sure we have mothers groups and local groups that stays there to make them accountable to it. So we our model just doesn't stops at building. So we are also work with local governments and the local groups, especially the mother group that could work in this system, so that it runs well even after we exit from there. Thank you. I hope I answered your query.
Great. Thank you so much. So what we'll do is I've put down the breakout question in the chat. How does today's conversation echoes in your context? It's simple, but we would love you to share with each other, how does it echo? So I'll open the breakout rooms. You have around 12 to 13 minutes, and then we'll be back. If you can give me a thumbs up, we'll be aligned. Perfect. I'm opening the rooms. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much. And I know it's a tough challenge sometimes to be in a breakout room where some are in spaces where they can speak, some are in spaces where they cannot speak. That's the reality of our virtual world today. But with that virtual reality, I will challenge you with one more thing today. Let's smile for the camera. Let's try to bring out the faces. It's a good group. It'll be lovely to know who's there and have the space together. So I generally count from 5 to 1. So I'll stop the share screen.
Turn your camera on.
Yeah. And where am I? Perfect. I haven't even started from 5 to 1 and we can see cameras. I should have done this exercise before letting you go into the breakout rooms. That's a lesson learned. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and for a better climate. Thank you. Thank you so much for being part of this wonderful conversation. I know a lot would have surfaced or some thoughts would have surfaced. It'll be good to hear a few voices as well. We are in the last 8 minutes. I know some people have to leave early as well. So what we'll do is I'll drop a poll so that we get your feedback while we are continuing the conversation. And then as soon as the conversation closes down, I'll hand it over to Kiara to share a bit about the next session we have. We have a slide on that. So we'll just share that. But yeah, I'll put down the poll, and if we can share what has surfaced from the group today, any conversations you want to share back.
Or anything you're taking away with you.
Yeah, even it could be a feeling. It could be a feeling of, okay, this resonates elsewhere as well. I'm not alone. I've heard that quite often sometimes.
Leaving with a lot of hope because we see this. My context is India, so we see this in different parts of India. It's happening in Assam right now. A lot of villages. It's pretty bad. It's quite bad in certain parts over here. So it's nice to see that there are, other organizations working towards this, and they've found ways to overcome this. It's just that so from in our context, our government tends to act once they see the adverse effects of it. It's never, like a precautionary measure. It's that things go bad, and that's when they try to, overcome it. And even when it goes bad, it takes them time to, really um allocate the budget for this, and then you have to have the willpower to bring different stakeholders to do this. So it's great that it's happening in so many parts in other countries, and it's hopeful and inspiring, and I hope this happens in many parts of my country too. So
Thank you,
thank
Tressa. And
you.
Tressa, you're contributing so impactfully, connecting with so many partners across the world through GSF as well. So it's really incredible. Thank you.
So,
Actually, this is a theme that came up in our group as well. The conversation about having the right data and information to have the conversation and to influence the decisions at the right time before the disasters happen. So what do we need to have these conversations to illustrate that in the long run, the cost is more, not only to monetary cost, but of course the suffering cost is much higher if you do things afterwards. So having these conversations and mobilizing early across the sectors, yeah, it's kind of the timing thing really came up. And also, we had an architect in our group, so a real sort of cross, sector nature of what we're talking about was there as well.
I can see some chat as well. There could be different solutions as well in different contexts. I don't know how we can maybe think of compiling these solutions, combining our context. A lot comes up in that as well. I've put in the chat about our next community of practice as well, which is open for everyone. So highly encourage you to join that as well. Uh, this is educating for a climate change future. Kiara, maybe you want to share a bit about it. I think that'll be, yeah.
Yeah, I'll share a little bit. So, real warm invite to the next session, which is happening on the 20th of August. We will shift our focus in that session more from the surviving pillar, which really was the focus today. How do we protect learning in the face of severe climate disruption? To how can we keep empowering schools to respond to the climate crisis in a way of preparing students with knowledge, but also agency to act in a world that's going to be shaped, already is, but increasingly by different unpredictable climate events. So we will have two speakers in that session. We'll have Professor Fernando Reimers, and we're going to have Margaret Wang as well, and they've been collaborating for several years. They're working out of Harvard Graduate School of Education, really focusing on climate education, and really their research is focused on what does it genuinely take to create climate-ready education systems. What does that look like in the classroom in terms of curriculum, but also what does that look like in terms of national policy? And Professor Fernando Reimers recently published a book, a sort of a compilation of different case studies and insights from his research into climate education from across the world. And he's going to be able to tell us a little bit more about high level what his book is about, what are some of his findings. And it's also a sort of first step into a wider collaboration between GSF and Harvard on the research that I've just mentioned earlier in the session. So we'll be going out to our community, all of GSF members, but particularly to the people, of course, who've been participating in the community of practice to really understand more in detail what what is happening in your local context, what are you doing in climate education in your schools with your partners, etc. So yeah, more on this to come, and we would love to see you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Kiara. And in the link which I shared, the link to the open book is also available. So please, you can access it right away. Yes, please let us know how we can strengthen these conversations. If you would like to email us separately, you can email us as well or reach out to GSF overall. But continue conversing so that wherever conversation is possible, at least that is happening, and we can gradually increase that fold. Thank you once again, Charlie and Sujina, for taking out the time and for taking part of this conversation for over a few months now. And thank you very much for being here. And thank you everyone for contributing so beautifully. Take care.
And continue conversing with each other. Of course, loop us into conversations, but also we've had very generous shares from across the community today. So reach out and let us know if there's any new collaborations, because we'd love to know.
Take good care of yourself. Keep your internal climate better as you strengthen the external climate.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.